Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, a lot in the news this week between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The violence has certainly erupted in that area, so we'll cover those stories, as well as a big scandal taking place with the Vatican. So we have the details on that as well. But first, close to 40 big wildfires are burning over the western United States right now. Now, probably the most aggressive blaze is at the foothills of Yosemite National Park. Called the Detweiler Fire, it has burned over 45,000 acres of land, doubling its size in the last 24 hours. Now, Highway 49 was closed as a wall of flames leapt across the road. Now, well over 2,000 firefighters have been battling the out-of-control fire since the beginning of the week.
That's right, but by Tuesday, when the wind started pushing the fire closer to a community of 1,500 homes, Jerry Brown, the California governor, had to declare a state of emergency. Thousands of residents were ordered to evacuate the town of Mariposa, which quickly became like a ghost town.
Now, peak tourist time at Yosemite is threatened by the vastness of this fire, knocking out some power lines in the area and threatening more. Now, because of record rains that recently ended the drought conditions in California, there is now a lot of dense vegetation that has grown up since then, fueling the wildfire.
Oh, interesting. Well, around-the-clock airdrops of water and retardant by over a dozen choppers and air tankers are a part of the efforts to bring the blaze under control. But CAL FIRE has asked for even more help to get ahead of it. When last checked, Jeff, the fire was 50% contained.
Well, a fire of another kind is being fought in Chicago, Illinois this summer. A crackdown by Chicago police and federal authorities to stop gun violence. Now, in June, the Department of Justice announced the city would participate in a program called Crime Gun Strike Force. Now, the goal of this program is to get illegal guns and repeat gun offenders off the city's streets.
58-year-old Willie Cooper, a businessman and community activist, was one of 11 people who were shot and killed in Chicago over the weekend. Cooper, who worked at an anti-violence center, which provides local teenagers with jobs, was shot just a block away from that center.
Another victim of the weekend violence was a 10-year-old boy who was riding in his car with his father when a van pulled up alongside them and began shooting. Now, the boy was taken to the hospital but did not make it. And Katan, this is the fourth child that has died this year so far in the Chicago gun violence. Now, his death as well as the others are still under investigation.
The Chicago Tribune recently published an article showing a spike in the number of homicides was due because of two main reasons, according to experts. The first reason was the release of the police dash cam footage showing police officer Jason Van Dyke fatally shooting Laquan McDonald 16 times, which were reported on sometime in the past. And secondly, the Justice Department launched this investigation of the Chicago Police Department, which revealed how officers were using excessive force and unfairly targeting African American residents.
Now, experts say the uptick in shootings in the Windy City became highly visible in the year 2016 when the city saw a 57% increase in homicides from 2015 to 2016. Now, 418 people were murdered in 2015 compared to 754 murders in 2016. Now, the amount of people shot increased also by 46%. Of course, not everybody dies as a result of the shooting, but that number has also increased. 2,964 people were shot in 2015 compared to 4,338 people shot in 2016.
That's one too many. Well, in 2017, it's of course not looking any better, with 375 people already having died because of gun violence in Chicago this year, and 4.5 months are left to go yet. So it's unlikely that the numbers will continue. It's likely, excuse me, that the numbers will continue to increase even with this new program in place.
Right, because they have tried other programs and also have not seen any results, so to speak.
Yeah.
Well, Venezuela is facing a crisis that has been in the making for several years. As OPEC set the price at oil at all-time lows, the world's 10th largest oil producer is feeling the impact. Oil accounts for 95% of the country's exports and 25% of its gross domestic product. Now, as a result of the falling prices, the economy is hard hit, so much so that food has become very scarce.
That's right. In fact, many people are heading across the border to Colombia in search of work and food. They're also fleeing the violence that has escalated between the country's military and the protesters, blaming the government for the economic collapse. Well, 90 people have died during the protests, and some of them actually find it hard not to get involved with the protesting, they say, because elderly neighbors are actually coming and knocking on their door for food or coffee.
Well, it is unlikely that things will get better in the near future. Venezuela's socialist president, Nicolas Maduro, is refusing to back down from his power grab, even as U.S. President Donald Trump threatens sanctions on the country. Now, the opposition has planned a nationwide strike for tomorrow. So, Katan, it looks like the problem will only escalate if they don't find a peaceful solution to their problems.
Well, in other world news, Europe is up in arms over the latest naval exercises getting underway. Now, various countries have been holding military naval drills off and on since 2012, just one way to prepare their troops for conflicts. But the latest announcement has provoked a strong reaction. For the first time ever, Russia and China are teaming up to hold joint naval drills.
As if that weren't enough to cause a stir, they will be heading away from territorial waters to hold the week-long drills in the Baltic Sea. And remember, the Baltic Sea is surrounded by the northern European countries on all sides, as well as several NATO bases.
Getting close to home there. Well, headlines in Western media have been exploding with propaganda about the 2017 joint sea drills between the two Asian countries, using words like invasion and war, while warning this could be a challenge to NATO. The Daily Star headline read, "Russia and China launch massive mock invasion near Europe's border this week." Well, the Express headlines really blew things up, saying, "Russia and China play war. Destroyers descend on Kaliningrad for major Baltic Sea drills." So they're really getting the people, excited and hyped up about this because they're, like we said before, really close to Europe's home, knocking on their door.
So what is all the hype and concern about? Well, it's simple. This is the first time Chinese warships have ever ventured into this part of the world. And if that wasn't enough of a threat, they are being joined by the less than popular these days Russian fleet. So as you mentioned, it's, that traveling, and it's a little bit too close.
That's right. Well, Russian ambassador to China, Andrei Denisov, has this to say about the North European countries' concerns. He said, "The Baltic states repeat their usual incantations, but at the same time, they take for granted the fact that NATO is deploying large forces on their territory."
And this type of response is nothing new. If you remember, we reported about last year when a Russian fleet sailed around Europe, and that sparked similar headlines. And some European countries were even considering sending out vessels at that time to intercept them.
Yeah, so we see the same things coming from both countries, NATO, China and Russia, but everybody kind of gets on edge when it's occurring from the other party. Right. Well, the paranoia over Russian Navy invasion has been around a long time. Of course, take the Swedish nation, for instance. For over 20 years, they insisted Russian submarines were lurking along their coastline. But come to find out, as the then Swedish Prime Minister Ingvar Carlsson announced in the mid-90s, quote, "It's a sad fact that what was originally stated to be intrusions into our waters have proved to be minks. Well, that's right. The furry swimming sea-like animals was what was actually in the waters, and they were saying this was Russian submarines.
Wow, just a little bit off.
Just
there.
a little bit in that situation.
Well, the U.S. and allied countries have just conducted their own massive exercises in Eastern Europe. Saber Guardian is what they called it, took place with some 25,000 personnel from 22 states. Now, this latest drill is the biggest of its kind in 5 years. Writer and political commentator John White says that the media is inflaming the situation by demonizing both Russia and China, painting them as evil empires.
Well, in other news, the Vatican is back in the headlines with another scandal. Our correspondent Larry McGee has more on this story. Larry, just how widespread is this latest Vatican scandal?
2 officials from the Vatican's Bambino Gesù Hospital are accused of embezzling funds to the tune of $500,000. Strangely enough, however, the theft was reportedly committed to finance renovations on the apartment of one of the Vatican's cardinals, and at one point the move was even defended by the hospital's president as an investment, with the argument that the cardinal's apartment would be used on some occasions for fundraising efforts by the hospital. The priest in question, however, Cardinal Bertone, who ranked second in power in the Vatican during the public reign of Benedict III, was not charged and alleges that he was unaware concerning any stolen funds. Analysts and those disaffected with the Vatican say the credibility of the standing pontiff is at stake concerning the incident, and the way that he addresses the matter, they believe, will be an indication of how serious he is regarding financial reform. The hospital from which the resources were taken is one of the leading pediatric institutions in Europe. The trial of the 2 officials implicated in the scheme comes during reports of a crackdown by Pope Francis, who is quoted as saying, "The worst cancer in a hospital is corruption." Publicized efforts such as the aforementioned are contributing to the popularity of the Pope, at least according to recent reports. Questions concerning the reigning pontiff were given to analysts on both sides of the aisle recently. The first question posed was, what exactly are the objections of critics concerning Pope Francis, given his increasing popularity amongst both Catholics and non-Catholics alike? The response, given by Matthew Smith's literary editor at First Things magazine, is that when Pope Francis was first elected into office, he celebrated his election with the hope that the incoming leader would be effective as a pontiff. The editor says that he has since changed his mind after seeing that Pope Francis is executing his plan of supposed reform at the expense of the Catholic Church and its most valuable members, the children, whom he believes have been orphaned as a consequence of the Western lifestyle, and it is them, he contends, that are objecting to Pope Francis. To the argument that Francis, who is seen by some as liberal in his policies, is merely avoiding the losing battle of trying to enforce conservative values in an age of liberalism, Smith points to recent conservative victories in the U.S. and Europe as indications that, among the people, the opposite is actually true. The young Catholic says he believes the pontiff's papacy represents a revenge of the past, where various church leaders from the 60s and 70s have reemerged to push their brand of Catholicism. On the question of whether or not the differences between the Pope and the laity has caused some to doubt his sincerity with regard to Marianism, Matthew says that Catholicism is a motley mix of people, and there is no guarantee of someone who is Catholic being perfectly right all the time or perfectly moral all the time. As to the Pope's constant refrain and call for love and mercy, Smith says there's nothing wrong with that, but what is necessary is a true love and a true mercy. He then quoted a verse from the Bible where justice and mercy are said to meet, and stated further that that is what the church is missing. He and others believe there has been too much of what is called anti-onanism, which he defines as a tendency to suggest that the truth of the gospel and mercy is contrary to the law. The merciless slaughter of people in the Euphrates region has not received the attention that many global analysts feel is rightly due, and certain talk shows this week sought to break through what's being called fake news and offer an unedited perspective on the trends sweeping the Middle East. Independent journalist Joe Lauria says it's very easy to get lost in all the details, and they are so frighteningly complex, especially in Syria. For an overall view, he says, if one is looking for a really big picture, you have to look at U.S.-Iranian relations, and in the subtext of that, Saudi-Iranian relations, and below that, the standoff between Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Egypt against Qatar, which he believes could be a prelude to conflict with Iran. The conflict between the U.S.-backed Saudis and Syria, Lauria says, overshadows the entire region. It is their proxy wars and conflicts that have to be brought to an end, he says, and he believes America is the only nation with the influence to bring both parties together and quell their conflicts, which have rippled outwards, producing additional fighting in Bahrain, Afghanistan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. The journalist says that has to be dealt with, but he feels as if the U.S., as opposed to helping, is actually worsening things by lowering itself to side with Sunni Muslims and help fight local wars. Middle East analyst Sami Nader contributes that what is really at stake today is the new order in the Middle East, because the order that was pushed 100 years ago is gone, and now there is a new order, but with different players and different regional powers. For instance, he says Russia is getting a big role in Syria, especially in the last 2 years. The United States is there active, along with Iran, and also to a lesser extent, Saudi Arabia. So the new order, he says, is set by the new regional powers, and the name of the game today is fighting Daesh, while the core issue is who will be replacing Daesh, and that will determine the areas of influence that will be controlled by the regional powers already mentioned. To recap, the analyst says that what is at stake today in the Euphrates region is the new order that will define the balance of power for years to come. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
It's interesting they mentioned the New World Order in that segment there. We mentioned not too long ago Henry Kissinger, who was also involved in that and was a very instrumental part in the things that revolved around that. So we'll see how that plays out in a few months.
Well, Palestinians, Muslims, and the Muslim world have started a day of rage in response to Israel's restrictions on the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, Al-Quds. Now, while Israel says that it doesn't seek to change the status quo at Al-Aqsa, Islam's third holiest site, yet many see this as Israel's giving in to right-wing anti-Palestinian Islamophobia, elements of Netanyahu's government and Israeli society.
Groups seeking to take over the mosque are rejoicing at these events and an opportune moment to act. Israeli security forces attacked Palestinian protesters at Al-Quds and across the occupied West Bank, firing live ammunition, rubber bullets, and tear gas during rallies, which the Palestinians have called, like we said, a day of rage. Now, this was, of course, declared by several Palestinian factions.
Well, again, these protests were in response to Israel's heightened restrictions on the Al-Aqsa Mosque, including the installation of metal detectors, cameras, and additional security forces. Israeli police also prevented men under the age of 50 from entering the Old City and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which forced Palestinians to hold Friday prayers on the streets. Now, some men over 60 were even turned back after trying to enter.
One Palestinian man told Press TV that it is their right to pray and practice their freedom at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and nothing is going to stop them. In Ramallah, hundreds of Palestinians held prayers in the main street that leads to the Israeli checkpoint that led to Kalandia, which is one of the entrances to Jerusalem Al-Quds.
Those protests also turned violent as Israeli police fired live ammunition and tear gas to disperse the crowds. Protests broke out in several other places, including Bethlehem and Hebron. Another Palestinian man spoke of how Israel made a racist decision to completely control Alaska, and he said that Palestinians will remain united in the face of their aggression, and we will continue defending our mosque. And it's actually those type of attitudes and that generate so much conflict, because neither side really seems to make any concessions there.
Right, right. Well, Israel have boosted up their forces in occupied Jerusalem in light of recent protests, yet Palestinians say that they will use every means available to stand against the occupation forces and defend their holy site.
Michael Lang, president of the American Institute for Foreign Policy, said of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, "This is a situation that I believe, if it doesn't ratchet completely out of control, would be able to be resolved with reasonable negotiations between the Israelis and the Jordanians as to how the status quo could be restored to Alaska." And of course, keep in mind, Katan, that Jordan is the one that actually has the custodianship of the site.
Yeah. Well, Lane continued, it would make sense for the Jordanians to be a part of the negotiation with Israel and Palestinians as the custodians of Al-Aqsa, and to make sure that the Palestinians, the Jordanians, making sure that they have their needs met with regards to the mosque.
Well, the hatred continues near Lions Gate in Jerusalem's Old City as Palestinians clash with Israeli security forces after 2 Israeli police officers were shot dead last Friday, which prompted additional security forces to be in place in what is called Haram el-Sharif to Muslims and Temple Mount to Jews.
That's right. The installation of metal detectors has angered Palestinians who claim that Israel is trying to expand control of the compound. They have been nightly demonstrations there from protesters, with Muslim leaders calling for mass protest ahead of Friday's prayers, when tens of thousands of worshipers are expected at the holy site.
Palestinian prayer goers say that they can't go in to pray through an electronic gate, so they stand outside to pray. Now, Israeli security spokesman said extra forces will be around areas of the Old City, the walls of Jerusalem, the different gates, and around the Temple Mount in order to allow the prayers to take place on the Temple Mount and to be able to respond immediately to any temple-related issues.
Interesting. Well, of course, in 1967, this hotly contested site was given to Jordan to control. Now, Jews are allowed to visit but not pray at the site, while Muslims have access for prayer. The Israeli government says it is in close contact with Jordan to find a peaceful solution to the crisis. Well, if a peaceful solution is what the nations want, then all they have to do is look to the place of peace called the House of Yahweh. Now, the cost of peace is not measured in bombs, bloodshed, and threats of war. In fact, if you want peace, you don't need millions, billions, or even trillions of dollars to achieve it. All you need is 1 cent. And that 1 cent is the 1 cent by Yahweh in the last days, and his name is Yisrael Hawkins. The laws found in the Holy Scriptures are the keys to open the doors to the way of life and peace. Contact the House of Yahweh today and request your free copies of the monthly newsletter and the Prophetic Word magazine. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also visit our website at www.ypnnews.com. And remember, any emails you can email at info@yahweh.com. For any international calls, you can call the number on your screen. And once again, we'd like to remind you of 2 programs that are out there on the market for you. The first one is the Yisrael Says program. You can learn more by going to www.yisraelsays.com. And the second one is the Ask Yisrael program. And you can also learn about that program by going to www.askyisrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next, the last day's teacher of peace, Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.